The U.S. sets a new record for COVID vaccinations, but Dr. Anthony Fauci warns about the risk of another surge. The question is, why are some states seeing a rise in cases? Plus, dueling delegations of Democrat and Republican lawmakers visit the border to blame one another for the migrant crisis. The question is, why is former President Donald Trump now talking about a possible visit? And the giant cargo ship that ran aground and blocked traffic in the Suez Canal now partially freed. The question is, when will traffic in the busy waterway get going again? It's way too early for this. Good morning and welcome to Way Too Early, the show that is always up for a little push in the right direction. I am Casey Hunt on this Monday, March 29th. We'll start with the news. The latest ABC News Ipsos poll shows widespread approval for President Biden's top priorities. 75% approve of his handling of vaccine distribution, 72% approve of his handling of the pandemic overall, and 60% approve of how he's handling the economic recovery. And as coronavirus vaccinations ramp up, the United States has hit a new daily record of shots administered. According to CDC data, nearly 3.4 million doses of the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson vaccines were administered across the country on Friday. That brings the U.S. 7-day average of doses administered to 2.6 million shots per day. And that number is expected to continue rising. The Biden administration says 11 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine will be distributed this week. According to the White House's COVID-19 response coordinator, the U.S. is still on track to deliver on its goal of making shots available to all adults by the end of May. Nice to kick off the morning with some good news. But there is still this. Even as vaccinations are increasing, some areas of the country are still seeing a rise in COVID cases and a plateau in hospitalizations. Here's what Dr. Anthony Fauci attributed it to.
It is not completely the variance. What we're likely seeing is because of things like spring break and pulling back on the mitigation methods that you've seen now. Several states have done that. I believe it's premature, Margaret, because when I've said many times to you that when you're coming down from a big peak and you reach a point and start to plateau, once you stay at that plateau, you're really in danger of a surge coming up. And unfortunately, that's what we're starting to see.
President Joe Biden set to pitch the first half of his $3 trillion infrastructure plan in Pittsburgh this week in an effort to improve the country's roads, bridges, and water systems. The White House press secretary also outlined a second bill the administration is eyeing to address health care and other social assistance programs.
What the American people will hear from him this week is part of his plan, the first step of his plan toward recovery, which will include an investment in infrastructure. And he's going to have more to say later in April about the second part of his recovery plan, which will include a number of the pieces you talked about, health care, child care, addressing that. The total package we're still working out, but he's going to introduce some ways to pay for that, and he's eager to hear ideas from both parties as well.
Joining us now, White House correspondent for Politico and co-author of The Playbook, Eugene Daniels. He is also an MSNBC contributor. Eugene, good morning. It's great to have you on the show. And I got to say, I feel like it's been a really long time since we had such an optimistic start to any day, frankly, let alone week. The polling that we're seeing here on how the Biden administration has handled essentially the pandemic, the COVID relief bill, plus the vaccination situation and the economy is very good, very strong for them. They have, of course, spent the last couple of weeks dealing with a series of crises, including, of course, the situation at the border. But how does this set them up going into a spring when they really are going to have to make, as Jen Psaki alluded to there, some tough choices about how to figure out what to do next?
Every single president, every single administration would give almost anything at any time of their presidency to have high numbers like this. This is just one poll, obviously, but it's a part of a trend that we've seen since the very beginning of the presidency, that people see the way that President Biden and the rest of his administration have been taking care of the pandemic and the economy as, something that they are very positive about. But to your point, in this era of politics, it's hard to see we're not seeing public opinion really move Congress, right? It's not going to really move Republicans to be more likely to act, to compromise with the administration, to work with the administration. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like we even saw during the COVID relief bill, the COVID relief plan was always consistently popular with the American public, and yet we didn't see any Republicans vote for it in the House or the Senate. So it's not likely to move any of them. But it's really interesting because they're thinking about infrastructure in two ways, right? She kind of mentioned this one kind of roads, bridges, waterways, and that's likely to get more Republican support if there's some to get. But then the idea that we saw during the campaign was that President Biden is interested in raising taxes on some of the wealthiest Americans, on some big corporations in this country to pay for it. And that's where he's going to lose any Republican support.
Well, so what does that look like at the end of the day? I mean, it seems like perhaps they are going to make this effort to say, OK, we want to build a road in your district, a road in your state. We want to patch up some infrastructure and basically dare Republicans to say no to that, while at the same time working on, as you point out, what's essentially becoming a massive infrastructure climate package that they're going to use the budget program, the reconciliation process to do. Is this basically their last challenge to Republicans to say, hey, you know, we're thinking about getting rid of the filibuster. If you don't want us to do that, show us you're willing to work a little bit.
Yeah, I think that President Biden's probably going to want to do a little bit more than just kind of this one extra bill, right? There are so many other issues in the country that are very popular with the American people. I think, we've talked about this in Playbook, is that if Chuck Schumer can continue to convince the American people that the filibuster, because it hasn't been used, right, this at this point in this year, but if they can continue to push this idea that Republicans are going to use it and then see them actually do that as they try to, like you said, put a road in a district, get rid of the potholes that are destroying your car tires. Those are things that the American people are thinking about. We're not traveling as much as we were pre-pandemic, but people still are going to work. People are still going places. And so if you can convince people in Republican districts that, hey, we're trying to give roads, but the Republicans don't want to do it, I think that there is a little pressure that they can put on Republicans. And that might be something that will sway at least a few Republicans, especially in the House and maybe even in the Senate, possibly.
All right. Politico's Eugene Daniels, thanks very much for kicking us off on this Monday morning, getting up early with us. We really appreciate it. Republicans and Democrats, meanwhile, made dueling visits to the southern border. And, of course, their takeaways could not have been more different. House Democrats toured a facility for unaccompanied migrant children, while Republicans headed to the border along the Rio Grande.
We're glad to see that the Biden administration, is building up the capacity to handle the kids who have presented themselves for asylum. The right destination for these kids is with their family or relative sponsors. It does take some time to process them, and they're much better off here than they are in the CBP processing centers, where we have seen, not just in the last week or so, but even before, in years past, the conditions at the CBP processing centers, where you have people sleeping with what it looks like aluminum blankets and so forth. So this is a much better situation for them, but it's not the right situation for them.
The Biden administration is taking people who are testing positive for COVID-19 and locking them in cages side by side. This is inhumane, it is wrong, and it is the direct consequence of policy decisions by the Biden administration to stop building the wall, to return to catch and release, and to end the stay in Mexico policy.
Senator Cruz also sent this tweet. These are the pictures the Biden administration doesn't want the American people to see. This is why they won't allow the press. This is the CBP facility in Donna, Texas. This is a humanitarian and public health crisis. The visits come a day after Biden faced a number of questions about the growing challenge at the border during his first formal news conference as president. Meanwhile, former President Trump says he might visit the southern border in the next few weeks, claiming that many border officials have asked him to.
A lot of people want me to. The Border Patrols and all of the people of ICE, if they want me there, they've asked me to go. And I really sort of feel I owe it to them. They're great people. They're doing an incredible job.
Mr. President, when do you think that you would go? When do you think you would go to the border?
Over the next couple of weeks, the Border Patrol wants me to go.
Okay, we're just going to leave that there. Still ahead here, the top moments from March Madness over the weekend. We're breaking down the winners and losers from the Sweet 16. And later, President Biden says the Justice Department is looking into Georgia's new voting law. We'll have those stories and a check on your weather when we come right back.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of state marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, tackling the issue of immigration, Mehdi Hassan, weighing in on voter suppression, and Frank Figliuzzi, writing about national security, along with Michael Steele offering his take on the Republican Party, Liz Plank commenting on gender issues, and others. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
Hey everyone, it's Tremaine Lee, MSNBC correspondent and host of the podcast Into America. Most of us have heard about the push to tear down monuments to the Confederacy and rename sites that invoke our racist past. But there's another movement underway to preserve sites of Black history and culture. This week on Into America, we're exploring some of those places and what it means to protect them.
The beauty that I see in African American historic places is that's where the souls of Black folks live.
Search for Into America wherever you're listening now and follow to get new episodes every Thursday morning.
Catch it. Get it in. Yep. Quinterly. Pass it off. Reese. Oh, yeah!
Welcome back. Second-seeded Alabama sent last night's Sweet 16 matchup against number 11 seed UCLA to overtime with that game-tying three-pointer at the buzzer. But UCLA scores the first 7 points of the extra period, and they never looked back. The Bruins stemmed the tide, 88-78, becoming just the second team ever to go from the first four to the Elite Eight. They'll meet top-seeded Michigan, who cruised to the next round with yesterday's 76-58 win over fourth-seeded Florida State. Sixth-seeded USC is back in the Elite Eight for the first time since 2001 after an 82-68 victory over number 7 seed Oregon. USC will face the number 1 overall seeded Gonzaga in the next round after the Bulldogs advanced with an 83-65 win over fifth-seeded Creighton. The Elite Eight, which features a trio of teams out of the Pac-12 conference, tips off tonight, starting with second-seeded Houston and number 12 seed Oregon State, followed by top-seeded Baylor against number 3 Arkansas. It's been an interesting year for all of our brackets. And the NCAA Women's Tournament has also reached the Elite Eight. Sixth-seeded Texas capped the Sweet 16 action last night with a 64-61 upset over number 2 Maryland. Oh, no. We love the Terps in our house. Texas joins Stanford, Louisville, and South Carolina, all advancing yesterday. The women's Elite Eight is notably missing NC State, which is the first number 1 seed to be eliminated after falling to fourth-seeded Indiana on Saturday. Top-seeded UConn and number 2 Baylor tip off today's games. All right, let's turn now to Olympics soccer. The U.S. will miss a third straight Olympic men's tournament after its under-23 team lost to Honduras 2-1 in yesterday's semifinal qualifying round. The deciding goal came off a mistake by the U.S. keeper, who played a costly pass off an opposing player that was deflected back into the net. U.S. soccer will still have representation in Tokyo after, of course, the World Cup champion women's team qualified last year. Ahem. Equal pay. And they say golf is a game of inches. And it's true. The PGA's Rafael Campos learned that the hard way yesterday, barely missing this putt on the final hole of the Punta Cana Championship that would have pushed the tournament to a playoff. Instead, Joel Damon earns his first ever win on the tour. Don't celebrate too early. And also in golf, a civil rights group is urging the PGA Tour and the Masters tournament to move next month's major championship out of Georgia. and away from the iconic Augusta National Golf Club in the wake of Georgia's new voting bill. The executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition tells Golfweek, quote, the PGA Tour and Masters Tournament have both made commitments to help diversify golf and address racial inequities in this country. And we expect them to not only speak out against Georgia's new racist voter suppression law, but also take action. Well, that would be a big deal. All right, time now for the weather. Let's go to meteorologist Janessa Webb for a check on the forecast. Janessa, how are we starting off the week?
Hey, good morning, Casey. I wish I could stick with the positive vibes this show is producing this morning, but unfortunately, we do have a dire situation that's happening across Nashville and portions of Tennessee. They're dealing with about 6 inches of rain just in the last 24 hours. We have a half a dozen communities that have been evacuated in this area. It's torrential rain and also the river flooding that's going to continue to be an issue even for today. Even though we're seeing the front make its way out of the area, still we're seeing those high tides and the water levels extremely high in this area. It's going to be watching that pretty closely. I also want to focus on the Northeast. This is an exiting storm system that produced that severe weather that we saw over the weekend. This is our third severe weather outbreak. You can start to see it's moving out of the area, but high winds, watches, and advisories, they're going to still be in place throughout the afternoon. We have had over 155 wind reports just in the last 24 hours. Behind the front is some cooler air, so we continue to see at least wind gusts up to 50 to 60 miles per hour throughout the afternoon across northern New England all the way into New York City. We're also going to be watching the central tier where you can see the upper Midwest, another storm system that's making its way across this area, 55 to 75 mile per hour wind gusts with this next storm system, and continue to watch snow for the Rockies. So this last Monday of March, we're still talking about snowfall up to at least 3 to 5 inches in that area. Casey.
All right, Janessa Webb, thanks very much. We really appreciate seeing you this morning. And still ahead here, opening statements get underway today in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer charged in the death of George Floyd. We're going to have a preview of what to expect in the courtroom. Don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment.
Whether it's the politics of climate change, the effects of state marijuana laws, or the challenges of racial injustice, get your daily dose of enlightening articles at MSNBC Daily. Written perspectives by people you know and trust, like Alicia Menendez, tackling the issue of immigration, Mehdi Hassan, weighing in on voter suppression, and Frank Figliuzzi, writing about national security, along with Michael Steele offering his take on the Republican Party, Liz Plank commenting on gender issues, and others. Plus, a fresh take every morning from me, Hayes Brown. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.
Welcome back. The trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin is set to begin today in Minneapolis. Chauvin faces second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter charges in George Floyd's death last June. The prosecution will argue Chauvin's restraint of Floyd for nearly 9 minutes was a substantial cause of his loss of consciousness and, ultimately, his death. Meanwhile, the defense is expected to present evidence that suggests Floyd could have died from several health conditions and his use of drugs. They may also bring up Floyd's previous arrest in May 2019 as part of their case. NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster is going to be covering this whole trial for us and has a preview of what we can expect in court today. Shaq.
Hi there, Casey. Well, yes, prosecutors will start to make their case against Derek Chauvin, the ex-officer accused of killing George Floyd. We expect court to gavel in at 9 a.m. Central Time later this morning. The judge will make some comments. He'll bring in the jury members and he'll officially swear them in. What do we know about this jury? Well, we know that 14 of them will be sitting to hear this case. When you look at that 14, 8 of them are women, the others are men, 8 are white, 4 are black, and 2 self-identify as mixed race. Once that jury panel is officially seated, the prosecution will start to make their case. We'll hear opening statements from the prosecution. And what lawyers and legal experts here in Minneapolis tell me to expect is you won't see that dramatic law and order emotional argument happening during these opening statements. This will be essentially a roadmap for the jury. They will make clear what kind of evidence the jury should expect to see, who they will be calling, and what the case will look like against that fired Minneapolis Police Department officer accused of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. As that is taking place inside the courtroom, we're also keeping an eye on what will happen outside of the courtroom. Both the mayor and the police chief are warning residents that they'll start to see a gradual increase in the law enforcement presence outside of the courtroom. It's part of what they call Operation Safety Net. You see some of the restrictions and preparations behind me with the barbed wire, the high fencing. That's something that is common in the downtown area here in Minneapolis. The mayor and chief saying that the National Guard presence will also continue to increase in the weeks and days as this trial progresses. This trial, Casey, is expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. Guys?
Shaquille Brewster on the ground for us. We're going to have full coverage of the trial throughout the day today. Meanwhile, authorities have partially refloated the Ever Given, that is the ship stuck in the Suez Canal. It has been stuck for 6 days. The chairman of the Suez Canal announced that the ship responded to the pulling and towing maneuvers, and crews modified the ship's course by 80%. So that puts the ship's stern 102 meters offshore. Previously, it was just 4 meters offshore. Authorities now hope to take advantage of the maximum high tide. The Canal Authority said it was sending, quote, a message of reassurance to the international maritime community to resume navigation in the canal once the vessel is fully floated. This is absolutely incredible. All right, still ahead here. The fight over Georgia's sweeping new rewrite of election rules is heading to the courthouse. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Greg Bluestein joins us with his new reporting on that. But before we go to break, we want to know, as always, why are you awake? Email us your reasons for being up and watching to waytooearly@msnbc.com, or drop me a tweet at Casey. Use the hashtag waytooearly. We'll read our favorite answers coming up later on in the show. To Way Too Early. It is 5:30 here on the East Coast, 2:30 out west. I'm Casey Hunt. President Biden may step in to try to address the restrictive new voting laws in Georgia. He told reporters the White House is working on a response. Watch.
Is there anything the White House can do to protect voting rights in Georgia?
Well, we're working on that right now. We don't know quite exactly what we can do at this point. The Justice Department is taking a look as well.
In a fiery statement earlier in the day, the president again urged Congress to pass the voting rights bill that would prevent restrictions like the ones in Georgia. He wrote in part, quote, "This is Jim Crow in the 21st century. It must end. We have a moral and constitutional obligation to act. I once again urge Congress to pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to make it easier for all eligible Americans to access the ballot box and prevent attacks on the sacred right to vote." And as the administration looks to shift its priorities to the next big project of infrastructure, Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia says the country cannot simply move on.
We've got to work on the infrastructure of our country, our roads and our bridges, and we've got to work on the infrastructure of our democracy. After all, the only reason we're able to get anything done, have the prospects of getting more done this Congress, is because people were able to show up and express their voices in their democracy. We wouldn't have passed the American Rescue Plan had the people of Georgia not stood up in the way that they did. Historic turnout. And so we've got to do both of those things.
All right, joining us now, political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Greg Bluestein. Greg, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much for getting up early with us. You've been reporting on some of the legal challenges to what we saw happen in your home state last week. This seems inevitable to me, but walk us through what those challenges are and what your reporting says about whether they're likely to succeed.
Yeah, there's now 2 sweeping lawsuits that have been filed. One was filed just hours after the legislation was signed into law by Governor Brian Kemp, and the other was filed last night. And they both essentially say these new rules are a grab bag of voting restrictions that flout the constitutional rights of Georgians and also disproportionately affect voters of color in violation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So they could both be moving through courts. I expect them to be kind of lumped in together, but they could be moving through courts at the same time that Congress is facing increased pressure to pass legislation that would pretty much preempt all this discussion.
So, Greg, everyone knows court cases can occasionally take very, very long periods of time to ultimately be resolved. There's a series of appeals. Obviously, it's possible it ends up in a higher court at some point along the line. What's your sense of whether this law is going to be in effect when Reverend Warnock, who we just saw there, faces voters coming up in 2 years? He was part of a special election. He's got to run for a full term. And in a 50-50 Senate, every seat matters.
Yeah, look, a lot of legal experts expect this to go to appeals courts. And the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Georgia is majority conservative. And then up to the Supreme Court, which is also, of course, majority conservative. So there's worries, and that's what has increased the pressure on Congress to pass some sort of federal voting rights overhaul that, again, would render all these court fights virtually meaningless. Because they would, among other things, strike down the hurdles to revive the advanced approval portion of the Voting Rights Act and other key pieces that Democratic critics of these voting rights restrictions say are necessary now to block restrictions from elections from taking place.
And Greg, can I just ask you briefly? I mean, one thing that stuck out to me was the substantial business community, particularly in Atlanta, Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, some of these other corporations. We did a little sports story on how the Masters is now coming under pressure over this law. What kind of impact do you think those companies could or might have on what happens to this law as it goes forward? I mean, how much pressure are they going to come under also in the context of this?
Yeah, those are companies, Atlanta-based companies like Delta, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, that have tremendous influence in the business community and the civic discourse in Georgia. And the reason why voting rights advocates have not let up the pressure on them, even after this bill has become law, is because they see Georgia as the first in a sweep of battleground states that could be taking up these restrictions. So they want to send the message now and not back off the pressure. I've covered protests calling for boycotts of those companies. As you mentioned earlier, there's pressure on Georgia's sports scenes, on Major League Baseball not to hold the All-Star game in Atlanta later this summer, on the Final Four not to pick Georgia Atlanta as a site for its major event. So there's all sorts of pressure on the business community to take more strident stance, because earlier in this debate, they were pretty much on the sidelines. They only tiptoed into it with very measured, very guarded responses. And now they're under pressure to take much more forceful stances.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Greg Bluestein, thank you so much for getting up early with us, Greg. We really appreciate your reporting, as always. And still ahead here, we're going to take a look at this past weekend's new episode of Saturday Night Live, including the cast's totally different take on Passover. Way too early. Back in just a moment.
I'm just a comedian. I don't have the answers, but I'm not just looking for them online. I'm looking around me. The GoFundMe for Xiao Junxie, the grandmother who fought back against her attacker, raised $900,000, which she immediately gave back to the community. That's where we are as Asians. Now come meet us there. In Mandarin, there's a cheer that goes, 加油, which basically means fuel up. I don't know what's helpful to say to everyone, but that's what I say to myself. Fuel up, do more. It's the year of the metal ox, which basically means a car. So everyone get in, buckle up. It's no pee breaks. We ride at dawn, grandmas.
Time now for something totally different. That was Saturday Night Live's Bowen Yang discussing what can really be done to help the Asian community. Former cast member Maya Rudolph returned to Studio 8H to host the show over the weekend. Rudolph and the cast had a little bit of fun calling out Florida's spring breakers for flouting COVID restrictions and enjoyed playing fully vaccinated members of the baby boomer generation. I recommend it. Rudolph's Kamala Harris impression returned for a Passover Unity Seder featuring Martin Short playing her husband, Doug Emhoff. Big names on both sides of the aisle, like 80 Bryant's Ted Cruz, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Joe Biden also made an appearance at the Seder. The Unity Seder featured Rudolph's and Short's Kamala and Doug in some racy predicaments. While the general audience may have found it funny, Harris's stepson, Cole Emhoff, had the same reaction anyone would have at the mere mention of their parental figures in a romantic situation. Watch.
Listen to me, girl. I support you. Every time you look around, Doug is so going to be there for you, honey. But from time to time, you look around, I'm not going to be there.
Cannot blame you. Can't blame you. Meanwhile, it almost looked like pre-pandemic times in Barcelona over the weekend as 5,000 coronavirus-tested rock fans packed into a concert hall Saturday night. The rock concert was the first of its kind with an audience that big that was held in Europe since the pandemic began. Everyone attending had to pass a same-day coronavirus screening, and those with pre-existing conditions were asked not to sign up. Upon entry, all audience members had to wear high-quality face masks provided by the organizers and agree to notify authorities if they come down with symptoms after the event. The concert was backed by Spanish health officials who conducted a smaller-scale case study of a 500-person concert in late December, and they had no outbreaks. Maybe that's in our future. And now this. Prince William has been named World's Sexiest Bald Man, according to a new report by The Sun. And the world's other famous bald men have a lot to say about it. The report featured a study conducted by cosmetic surgery specialists Longevita, that found over 17.6 million mentions of the prince being described as, quote, sexy in blogs, articles, and pages found in Google search. The prince beat out Mike Tyson, Pitbull, and Michael Jordan. Some other famous bald men had a lot to say, like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who tweeted, quote, how in the cinnamon toast expletive does this happen when Larry David clearly has a pulse? Hashtag demanding a recount. Stanley Tucci, who is also bald, posted to Instagram a grid of qualified famous bald men, including Bruce Willis, LL Cool J, and Patrick Stewart, saying, quote, whose crown should wear this crown? So many wonderful choices. Take a close look at that photo grid Tucci posted. You might have missed that actor Ryan Reynolds, who is not bald, is on there, to which Reynolds commented, wait, ... Okay, yeah, I'm not really sure about that Prince William selection, but hey, we'll go with it. All right, still ahead here, we're going to check in with Dr. Kavita Patel on the latest in the nation's battle against the coronavirus. And as we go to break, let's take a look at this date in history. 48 years ago, the last U.S. combat troops left South Vietnam, ending America's direct military involvement in the Vietnam War.
And so here today in Hanoi, the American military involvement in the Vietnam War finally came to an end. For if anything or anyone symbolized the American agony of Vietnam, it was the prisoners. As fighting men, they were instruments of war. As prisoners, they became instruments of peace.
Welcome back. As experts warn of another surge, millions more Americans will be eligible for vaccinations today, with 6 new states allowing all adults to make appointments. Kansas, Louisiana, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, and Texas are joining these other states today, where they've already expanded eligibility. Absent from that list, though, are many states in the Northeast, where much of the recent case spikes come from. Minnesota will start allowing all adults to book appointments on Tuesday, with Indiana and South Carolina following on Wednesday. Joining us now, physician and fellow at the Brookings Institution, Dr. Kavita Patel. She is a former Obama White House health policy director and an MSNBC medical contributor. Dr. Patel, it's great to see you. And I'm not going to lie, it's nice that we've had more positive news on the COVID front this morning than we have in some recent weeks. The fact that people are opening up eligibility to get this vaccine. At this point, do you think the Biden administration's on track to meet that 200 million shots goal that they set? And when is it, do you think it'll be relatively easy, not stressful? We're not going to be clicking on, links to appointments at CVS and Walgreens and watching them disappear as we try to get our family members vaccinated.
Yeah, Casey, I can tell you're experiencing this on a personal level, as I am as well, trying to help people navigate these portals. But look, we've administered about 100 million shots so far, and I do think that the Biden administration will meet their goal of 200 million by the first 100 days, which candidly I never even thought would be possible. But a couple of things made it happen. The supply, partly invoked by the Defense Production Act, being not just triggered, but acted upon to get basically 24/7 manufacturing from the 3 authorized vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. And then number 2, to your point, kind of pushing states. I think when President Biden set kind of this May deadline of having all adults be eligible, I actually think these states, especially ironically, the ones you listed that are majority kind of Republican governed, said, okay, we're going to beat it. And that's great. I think setting up an incentive like that has worked. I think to your question more specifically, still going to be about another month before I think you could kind of just walk in and say, well, this is the vaccine I want and where can I go and get it, and easily get an appointment. But it's still coming along at a pretty impressive clip, with more and more vaccination sites being populated on a daily basis.
No, that sounds like after a year of this, the next month does not, thankfully, sound that far away. Dr. Patel, one of the main problems originally that we saw in battling this, of course, was the politicization of mask wearing and other basic measures. Are we going to see that, do you think, in the vaccination arena as well? I mean, how concerned are you once we do get to this point where everyone that wants a vaccine has been able to get one? We're still going to have people who haven't actually gotten them. How does that affect the rest of us who decide that we want to be vaccinated? And what do we need to be doing to try and convince people that this is safe and effective and helps everyone?
Yeah, I think having those conversations kind of at a personal level actually do work. I find that when people kind of tell me, no, I don't want the vaccine, and if I actually probe and I don't try to say or blame or judge, and I ask kind of, what are you thinking? Safety questions come up. A lot of women in reproductive age are still concerned about effects that they might have on taking a vaccine and effects on a future pregnancy. I think addressing those, 1, it takes time, Casey. 2, I do think it takes a conversation with a health professional that actually understands the data, more specifically, somebody kind of who's looked at the trials. And then to your point, I think we are going to have a point after which we still have probably tens of millions of Americans who do not want to receive a vaccine. And I want people to understand that, herd immunity isn't an on and off light switch. It's a bit of like a dimmer dial. So the more and more people we can get vaccinated sooner rather than later, the earlier kind of a return to normal happens. I actually think that incentive matters. I think you're going to start to see a lot of employee workplaces and other places get vaccines after the country has had a chance to get them. And they will try to make it easier for some of those more reluctant staff. Because you're right, Casey, right now, you have to try to really work to get the vaccine. But for those who don't want it, as it becomes easier to get it, more convenient to get it, I do think we're going to be able to address it. There are always people who do not want vaccines for different reasons. And we have to remember this is still a medical procedure, getting that shot. And we have to walk people through what not getting it could mean for them.
Fair points all. All right. Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much for being up early with us. We really appreciate your insights as always. And earlier on in the show, we asked all of you, why are you awake? We got this note from Paul, who writes, I'm up for the shoulder MRI I've been waiting to get since the beginning of the pandemic. Excited to get back out on the tennis court. For real, have fun. Another viewer says they're just returning from the golf course in Germany, where it is not way too early. Well, thank you for spending some time with us. I love all of our international viewers. Shout out. I mean, we've got a lot of you in Australia, where I think we're in prime time. And Jenny shares this photo, up way too early to fly from the Netherlands to NYC to see my family for the first time since October 2019 because of COVID. Hashtag joy. That does, in fact, these kinds of pictures are giving me life. So enjoy seeing your family. And coming up next here, we're going to take a look at the Axios One Big Thing. And coming up on Morning Joe, Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison, will join the conversation after vowing to fight Republican efforts to restrict voting access. Don't go anywhere. Morning Joe, just moments away.
Dateline, the true crime original. Every Friday, you'll find a mystery to be solved, a story to be told, and justice to be served. Every Friday, an all-new Dateline with a twist. The True Crime Original. Every Friday at 9/8 Central, only on NBC.